The book of Ruth. I don't know if that's something that you read regularly, but it tends to be one of these little books that's tucked away back in the Old Testament, and every now and then someone says, let's turn to the book of Ruth, and you're like, oh yeah, I like that story. I remember that one. I remember Ruth, and it's almost like it's not something we typically do a lot of studies in. But when you think of the book of Ruth, we all tend to know the general story. If you've been in church for very long, you know that the story starts, as we've just read, with Naomi. We see the picture here. Naomi and her husband Elimelech. They are there in Bethlehem. That's where they lived. That's where they were making their home. They had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And then famine hits their land. And over the course of time, they have to leave. And they go to Moab to try to get survival for their family, really. And then, of course, more tragedy strikes. We see the husband dies. We see both sons die. And Naomi is left with two daughters-in-law, one named Orpah and one named Ruth. And then, through the rest of the book, it's only 4 chapters. Ruth unfolds as someone who comes back with Naomi and ultimately finds this kinsman redeemer in Boaz and allows really the perpetuation of the line that would ultimately lead to King David and then eventually to Jesus Christ because of Ruth and what she was able to do in terms of securing this kinsman redeemer through Boaz. And oftentimes people, if you look at commentaries or you look at people who would preach through Ruth, as the book suggests, you think that the main character is Ruth, because it's named Ruth, right? But and obviously Ruth has a central role in this, but I want us to look at Naomi this morning, because I think even more than Ruth's influence in the book, I think that you see a lot more central, primary part of the story that revolves around Naomi and her heartache and her restoration. And the whole book starts with Naomi, starts talking about, and the whole book ends with Naomi. And I want us to take this through that this morning, because I think that what Naomi deals with through this book is something that every, not just mother, struggles with, but probably every person as well. And that is the fact that she couldn't see beyond the circumstances she was living in. Let's take a look at this and start looking at Naomi's nearsightedness. We first see this revealed to us as the first few verses of Ruth begin to unfold for us. It says here in verse 1, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." So it gets right into the story from the get-go. We know that there's a man and his wife and his 2 sons, and things weren't going well. Things were bad for them. They lived in Bethlehem, and the first thing we find within the first sentence is that there was a famine in the land. I don't think in today's terms we really understand what famine means. I think if you lived in a third world country where you see these images of people that live in desert areas and whatnot, and you realize, boy, a famine could really decimate a population. But, for us, it's just like, oh, went to the grocery store and they were out of, canned tuna, and that's, been a hardship for me. That's a famine for us. Or like last year, we went and they couldn't find the toilet paper, right? There's a famine. It was terrible. This is our idea of what this is. But for these people, a famine was much greater than just something that wasn't in stock at the grocery store. These people depended on farming and growing their crops or allowing other people to grow crops in order to have their community and them as a family survive. They would not have enough to eat. And of course, if you know anything about agriculture, you realize famines tend to be a multi-year event. It's not just, oh, we had a poor crop this year. This was a situation that was happening over the course of time where there wasn't enough rain. Here in the land of Israel, it's a very arid country to begin with, and they depend on every drop of rain. In fact, I think if you look at some of the Israeli technology that's out there today for growing crops, it's amazing. They have learned how to irrigate and grow crops on the least amount of water possible, and they've done this out of necessity. because if they can't figure out how to grow crops with a little bit of water, they wouldn't be able to survive there and flourish. Well, here in this day and age, there was a famine. There wasn't enough water. It was a multi-year event. They were getting to the point where desperation had set in. There was a real hardship. They couldn't grow enough food. They were going to starve to death if they didn't make some drastic decisions. And so here was Naomi and her family and her 2 sons just getting established there in Bethlehem, farming, doing the best they can, and all of this tragedy begins to strike. I don't think we've often think about this, but do you realize to make this decision to move to the land of Moab, what it must have meant? Here she was. They had to leave the land that they grew up on. They had to leave their friends. They had to leave their community. They had to leave their extended family that they would have been there to support each other in. They would have left their people. They would have left their social network that they were in. And they would leave with just this glim hope that hopefully the land of Moab had better ability to survive than here. They didn't even know that for sure. They were just hoping that if they left and went to this foreign country, somehow, even as strangers in this foreign land, that they could somehow survive. And so they packed up their belongings, they did all they could, and they went through this hardship. But, first off, you recognize, even in the midst of those types of things, they had each other. That's mentioned right off the bat. It was still the woman and her husband and her 2 sons. And it was like, well, I have my family. We're going to gather up together. We're going to do this together because family sticks together. We're going to make this happen. We're going to survive. And so we see this as the first picture in verse 1. But then things begin to get worse. Things begin to unfold. We see in verse 3. It says, and Elimelech, almost without warning, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And she was left with her 2 sons. So out of the blue, without much explanation, the husband is dead. They've moved now to this foreign country. They've moved away from their family and friends. They've tried to establish a life here. And out of the blue, Naomi's husband dies. So Naomi's not only dealing with the hardship of moving to a foreign land, now she's dealing with the grief and loss of her partner in life. She's dealing with also some financial circumstances as well. Because in this society, in this day and age, it was a patriarchal society. And that's just a big word that means that men are the ones that made things happen. They're the ones that owned the land. They're the ones that could enter into contracts with others. And the ladies and the wives could not. They were second class in many ways. And so in this society, women couldn't even own land. And if the husband died, they were really at the mercy of either their sons, who hopefully were of age, or extended family members who were men that could kind of come in and help them through this time. So here's Naomi, struggling to survive, moved to a foreign land, loses her husband, doesn't know about her future, but she still had her 2 sons. And you got to think, maybe she just thought, well, at least I have them, we can get through this together. Well, that doesn't last long if that was her sentiment, because in verse 4 we see what happens next. It says, the 2 sons, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. And the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Now, we move on from your husband dying to now her 2 sons in this foreign and strange land found 2 wives to take. Now, you note it's very clear from the get-go, these 2 wives were not Jewish. They weren't from Bethlehem. They weren't from Jerusalem. It's very clear over and over, these ladies were from Moab. And while there was no direct prohibition from them actually marrying someone from Moab, there was a strong Jewish tradition, and the rabbis would have not been happy with this type of thing happening. And there's many types of warnings, even through the Old Testament. Think of Samson and Delilah. Remember what his parents said when he started going after these Philistine ladies and some of these others? They said, "Can't you find somebody amongst our own people to marry?" And Samson was like, "Well, I want Delilah." And you saw what happened with him. And of course, we look back to the patriarchs. You look at Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. When they were looking for wives, where did they get sent back to? Back to the homeland, back to their own people. They weren't to marry people that were in these other lands. They weren't to take wives from this land. And you know, while Orpah and Ruth might have been and probably were wonderful women, nice women, pleasant ladies, you've got to think that this caused some more concern for Naomi. No longer did she have a husband. Now her sons were both taking wives of people that were going to possibly lead them away from the Lord. And so there was some question, there was some concern. And then, of course, it says they were there for 10 years, and Mahlon and Chilion both died as well. At this point in time, Naomi's left with 2 daughters-in-law who were both Moabites and no grandchildren born to her. The entire line of the family would end. This was a death sentence. If you think in Jewish culture, the family line and the passing down of tradition, the passing line of religion, but also the transfer of wealth and of land and things like this, all happened through the family line. And Naomi was now the last one. In a way, she was all alone. And as she says later in the book, she's too old to bear any more children. She's not going to have any more sons, even if she had a husband. Things looked pretty bleak for her. And so she's left with these 2 daughter-in-laws, and she begins to try to send them on their way. It says in verse 8, Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." And then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So Naomi says, "You 2 ladies, you need to go get a life for yourself. Go back to your own homes. Go find a new husband amongst your own people, and go make a life for yourself. Because here I am, all alone. And you ladies you don't need to live in my misery." You can feel the misery that's beginning to well up within Naomi. And Naomi, of course, as many of us would have probably felt the same way, just saw these circumstances, and they overwhelmed her, like they would for us. I mean, you have a loss, you have a husband, you have a son, you have foreign land, you have difficulty to survive, you have financial difficulty. All of these things fell in on Naomi, the mother, all at once. A very difficult situation. And so it's no wonder what the result of this nearsightedness was. The result was bitterness. Verses 19 to 21, this is revealed to us. It says, so they too, eventually, of course, Ruth says, well, I'm coming back with you, Naomi. And of course, we know the famous line, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God, and where you go, where you die, you know the whole verse. And so Naomi reluctantly lets Ruth come back with her. And it says in verse 19, so they too went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them, and they said, is this Naomi? Can you hear the inflection of what these people were saying? It had been at least 10 long years since this family had left. And it wasn't that Naomi was no longer recognizable, like they wouldn't know who she was, like, oh, we forgot about you, Naomi. No, the inflection behind this, as will be revealed, is the fact that, is this the same person that left? You are barely recognizable in terms of your demeanor. Her demeanor had changed. Her attitude, her circumstances had gotten the best of her. She had turned from someone who was known as being pleasant and cheerful and kind and gracious to someone who was filled with misery and bitterness and anger at the Lord. How do we know this? Well, first of all, we know this because Naomi's very name, if you look in the Hebrew, Naomi's very name means to be pleasant, to be kind, to be good, to be happy. If you put it in today's vernacular, you might have called Naomi Mary Sunshine. Where Naomi went around, she always spread the sunshine with her. And everybody knew Naomi to be this type of lady. It wasn't just her name, it was her attitude. It matched her name. And that's why when they said, "Is this Naomi? Is this happy, merry sunshine lady that was sent out 10 years ago?" Because she sure doesn't look like it. Her circumstances, her nearsightedness has really gotten the best of her. And so Naomi confirms it. She says, "Yes, it's still me," in verse 20. She said unto them, "Call me not Naomi. Don't call me Mary Sunshine anymore. I don't have any sunshine to give anyone anymore." She says, "Rather call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me." Now, there's some significance to that word as well. This word Mara is a name that would just simply mean bitter and angry and upset. Someone who had just seen the short end of the stick in life and had just allowed it to fester within themselves. And she said, "You're never going to see the smile on my face again." This is what she was saying to the people of Bethlehem. "You're never going to see that old Naomi again because the Lord's dealt bitterly with me. You may as well just start calling me by a new name. Call me Mara, because the circumstances of life have gotten the best of me. I'm all alone. I've got no husband. I've got no sons. I've got no hope. Nothing has gone right." And as a result, this short-sightedness that she had, the circumstances that she allowed to get the best of her, what did she do as a result? She blamed the Lord himself. And she said, "The Almighty," in the end of verse 20, "hath dealt very bitterly with me." She says, "I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me?" She had nothing good to say. You ever met that person that was like the Mara from Naomi? And you're like, "I really don't want to ask you how you are today because I'm afraid you're going to tell me," one of those type of people. They're like, there's some people that are like Naomi's, right, in life. And they're like the optimist. No matter what you say to them, it's, it's good. "Oh, it's raining today." "Well, that'll be good for the flowers," It's one of these types of people. But then you always meet these other people who are like, "Hey, it's sunny today." "Yeah, but it's going to rain tomorrow," "Yeah, but it's getting cold. I heard bad news coming." They always want to share with you the bad side of the story, right? This was Naomi. She used to be the kind of person that saw the good, that spread the good, and she turned herself, because of her circumstances, into that person who just was bitter and angry and negative about everything in life because she was only short-sighted. She was nearsighted in her thinking. Of course, the story in Ruth doesn't stop just with chapter 1, and we're thankful for that. Because, of course, we know that Naomi's vision begins to change. By the end of the story, it changes from a nearsighted vision that's produced bitterness in her life to someone who sees something further down the line, much more far-sighted. And so we see, of course, they begin to settle in, her and Ruth, and they have nothing to their name, and so Ruth begins to go out and glean in the field. She picks up the leftover kernels of barley and grain that are left in the field. I don't know if you've ever thought about what it must be like. But this wasn't like husking ears of corn. This was little grains of barley that she would sift through the fields after they were done and try to find just enough to add it up, keep putting it in the bag until they might have enough for dinner that night. This was the situation that Naomi, they didn't come back with a wad of cash. She didn't cash in her estate. She didn't have a big inheritance. The life insurance didn't come through for Mahlon and Chilion. There was nothing for her. And so they were just really brought down to a place of humility, a place of begging. And this is where we find Ruth. She goes out. She says, well, I'll go try to see what I can find. And she would go to the fields. And, of course, on the very first day, by chance, she found herself in the field of Boaz. And we can't get into all the encounter there. But, of course, in the course of finding Boaz, Boaz takes pity on her and tells her to really come along, and we'll make sure we're taking care of her. And he tells his men, go take care of Ruth, make sure that she has, just leave a little extra, drop a little extra off the cart next time. Make sure she has enough. And so she comes back after that first day in chapter 2 and verses 19 and 20, and we see what happens. She has all of this barley she brought back from Boaz's mercy that he gave her. And it says, her mother-in-law said unto her, where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. One of the things that's going to begin to change Naomi's attitude from nearsightedness to a far-sighted vision is this first encounter. By chance, Ruth goes out and finds the field of one of the very few people that was left that could redeem them from the situation they were in. You see, again, we're not geared to think the way Jewish organization and Jewish law would have meant, but the way this worked was if you had a distant relative or even a close relative, and you were a lady who had lost their husband or lost a son, what you would do is if someone who wasn't married, they could actually come and marry you and produce children with you as a means of fulfilling the family line. And the property that your husband once held that you were no longer able to hold, they could purchase back. And you could have an inheritance. You could have wealth once again. But that was only if this Redeemer would be willing to function in that role. You had to find someone who had the money to buy the land and who was willing to actually go and marry the person and fulfill that role of being a redeemer. And so when Naomi finds out this is Boaz, the first thing that she realizes is one little glimmer of hope. She came back with no hope. But the far-sighted nature of Naomi, we see just this little glimpse now. Ruth comes back with a whole bunch of gleanings, more than should have been possible. She realizes something is up, and she realizes at this point that God maybe has been changing the tide of where it is they were going to be living. And so she says to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who had not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. Now that doesn't sound like bitter Mara speaking. That sounds like pleasant Naomi, once again realizing that, yes, the Lord may have seemed like he was angry with you and judging you, but here, again, he's blessing. Blessed be he of the Lord. She says, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. And so she sees possibilities. And then we move on, and again, I wish we had more time for the story, but we don't. We move into chapter 4. Of course, we know the story. Ruth eventually goes and speaks to Boaz, and Boaz agrees to become her redeemer. But there's a problem because Boaz isn't the closest next of kin. There's another redeemer who is closer in relations to Naomi, and he says he has first right of refusal on this. If he wants to redeem you, he gets to do it. But if he doesn't, he says, then I will do it. And of course, this is the stage that's set. And eventually Boaz confronts the man, and the man says, no, I don't want to redeem her for myself. And so Boaz agrees to marry Ruth. And then we see in verses 13 and 14 of Ruth chapter 4 the result of this situation. 13 and 14, it says, Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when he went in unto her, the Lord gave unto her conception, and she bare a son. And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. You know, she moved now from just seeing the glimpse of a possibility of being redeemed to now the reality of redemption actually coming to her. That redemption recognized something that wasn't just a happy day where they got married and things are going to be okay again. No, this meant something greater than just we're going to have enough to eat. This meant that the family line was going to continue, that redemption was going to be found through this man Boaz. And this was something that allowed her to see further down the line than just the circumstances she had within herself. And it says that in verse 15, he says, And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life. Who is the he? This was the little baby that was born. And a nourisher of thine old age, for thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, is better to thee than 7 sons hath borne him. You realize, Ruth, of course, was faithful to Naomi through all this time. But can you imagine being a faithful daughter-in-law to a bitter old lady? This is the story with Naomi. Naomi discounted Ruth at every turn, and even the neighbors came to Naomi at this point and said, Well, now you're finally able to hear some truth, Naomi. The truth of the matter is this: Ruth was better to you than 7 sons. Now that was a slap in the face. Naomi had 2 sons, right? They both died. All she could think about was what I lost. I lost them. And then the ladies came to her and says, You realize Ruth has been better to you than 7 sons could have ever been? This was a real turnaround for Naomi. She was short-sighted. And instead of appreciating what she had in life and what God wanted to do with the things in front of her, all she could think about is what she had lost. She needed to be far-sighted instead of nearsighted. And so it says in verse 17, the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. You realize the far-sighted vision that Naomi needed to have was something greater than herself. It was the fact that through her own circumstances, God was going to continue his line. He was going to fulfill his promise to Abraham. He was going to continue to establish a line that was going to rule not only the nation of Israel through the King David, but ultimately through Jesus Christ himself. All because a bitter old lady needed to find the far-sighted vision that she had lost because of her circumstances. What's the result of far-sightedness? Not bitterness. It's blessedness. Naomi never realized until the very end just how blessed she had been. How God had been with her all along the way. And even though she had lost so much and gone through so many trials and so many difficulties seemed to plague her, the circumstances were so great and so heavy upon her life that only limited her vision to what was there. She needed to be looking down the road. She needed a greater vision. She needed to see the possibilities of what God might do. She needed to experience the redemption that God wanted to have for her. She needed to appreciate what it is that she had in front of her, and she needed to recognize God will be faithful whether the circumstances are good for me or not. God will always accomplish his plans, and he will always have the glory in the end. You know, as a mom or as a dad this morning, it's easy for us to look at our home life, to look at our family life, to look at our circumstances and get down about it. It's easy for us to think about just the things that we've lost, just the things that don't seem to have turned out as planned. And I'm just going to challenge you, as I know every mother does, needs to be challenged, to look further than that. To realize the same God that was faithful to Naomi is the same God that wants to be faithful to us as well. He's a good God. Every good and every perfect gift comes from Him. When we talk about counting our blessings, it's hard sometimes when we've had difficulties in life. But the fact is, we need to think about the blessings that God wants to bestow upon us yet. Great things are yet to come. We just have to have that far-sighted vision. I don't know that Naomi ever lived to see King David reign on the throne. But the fact of the matter was, when Naomi's life was restored, when her family line was brought back through this event, it was just as if she was there experiencing it in person, because her vision was no longer nearsighted. She had seen what the future had in store.